The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for episode 63 of The Murder in My Family. I'm your host, Mike Morford. In this episode, we'll be discussing the case of 19-year-old Michele Frank, who went missing after leaving her St. Louis, Missouri job in the early morning hours of October 1st, 1984. When she didn't return home, her family feared the worst, and sadly, her body was found less than a week later. She had been brutally murdered. We'll jump into this case after some quick housekeeping. Independent podcasts like this one depend on word of mouth to bring in new listeners. So if you find that you enjoy this podcast, please take a minute to rate and review it wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure to introduce a friend to the show and invite them to listen. With your help, The Murder in My Family can grow and reach a new audience. To learn more about the podcast or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderMyFam or by searching for the Murder in My Family podcast on Facebook. If you'd like to support this show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon include early access to ad-free episodes of the show, plus bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include thank you cards, stickers, and more. If you prefer to, you can also support the show through a PayPal donation by visiting paypal.me/themurderinmyfamily. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters. And thank you to all of the supporters that generously donate and help keep the show growing and improving. One more note before we get started. Please consider supporting any of the sponsors that you hear on The Murder in My Family, the way that those sponsors support the show. It's with our sponsor support that this show can go on and continue to provide a platform to share these stories with you in every episode. Thank you, and now on with the show. Michele Denise Frank was born on March 6, 1965. She has two sisters, Angie and Debbie, and a brother, Timothy. Michele's parents divorced, and they both later remarried. But the family stayed close, and Michele shared a tight bond with her siblings. Michele graduated from Bayless High School in 1983. She was petite in stature, but had a bubbly personality and a winning smile. She moved out to live with her boyfriend, but things didn't work out between the pair, and she wound up moving back home with her family in High Ridge, Missouri, roughly 30 miles from downtown St. Louis. Over the summer of 1984, when she was 19, Michele started working as the night shift supervisor at a Jack in the Box fast food restaurant, which was located at 4292 Bayless Avenue in St. Louis. The new job meant Michele would have to periodically close the restaurant late at night. This was something that Michele's mom, Sharon, didn't like. She felt it was too dangerous for a pretty young teenager like her daughter to be working late at night in a big city. Michele told her mother she wasn't closing the restaurant anymore, which was a bit of a white lie, because she didn't want her mom worrying about her. On Sunday, September 30th, 1984, Michele was scheduled once again to close the restaurant. But she wasn't feeling well and debated whether or not to go into work that day. Eventually, she felt good enough to head in and made the decision to go. A decision which would prove to be fateful. Her shift was uneventful, and Michele closed the store as usual. Early on Monday morning, October 1st, at about 1:15 a.m., Michele's co-worker saw her drive off in her black Pontiac that had once belonged to her grandfather. Everything seemed normal when she left, but unfortunately, Michele never made it home. When Sharon awoke and found out that her daughter Michele hadn't come home, she immediately became concerned and phoned the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. But police told her they couldn't start an investigation until Michele had been missing for at least 72 hours. That was standard procedure in 1984. Today, an investigation is supposed to begin as soon as a person is reported missing. It was hard for Sharon to wait around, wondering where Michele was. She became frustrated, and she decided to call the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office in Clayton on October 3rd, just 48 hours after Michele went missing. She chose to call them because the Jack in the Box restaurant where Michele worked was located in their county. The next day, the sheriff's office received a call about a 1983 Pontiac parked on Sweet Gum Drive in St. Louis, about 2 miles from the Jack in the Box. It turned out to be Michele's car, but there was no sign of her. St. Louis County deputies began interviewing neighbors on Sweet Gum Drive and processed the Pontiac for evidence. One witness reported seeing 2 men around Michele's car who may have dropped it off where it was found, but they couldn't provide a lot of detail about the men. Michele's family anxiously awaited news or developments. At around 11:45 a.m. on Friday, October 5th, 5 days after Michele was last seen, a deer hunter found Michele's nude body in a wooded area, a quarter-mile north of the Jefferson Barracks Bridge, on the Illinois side of Monroe County. She had been strangled and sexually assaulted. Her time of death was never determined. Illinois State Police and Monroe County Sheriff's Department took over the homicide investigation. Investigators believed Michele was killed where her body was found. And there's a belief among many that Michele may have known her killer or killers, either personally or from the restaurant where she worked. Many people have been questioned, including friends and co-workers of Michele, as well as her ex-boyfriend. But no prime suspects ever emerged, at least publicly. One interesting note: when police allowed Michele's family to pick up her car, after driving it, they found that there was an issue with the brakes. Upon further inspection, they found that the brake lines themselves had been cut, something that the investigators apparently had missed. When they looked into Michele's background, investigators found that she was well-liked, and there were no red flags or anything that would point to a motive for her murder. At the time of the murder, police felt that they had little evidence to work with, and the case went cold. But that was before DNA, so some of the evidence that they collected may one day provide answers or lead to the identity of Michele's killer or killers. In the late 1990s, Michele's sister Debbie, who was just 11 years old when her sister was murdered, began calling investigators to ask what happened to Michele's case. And shockingly, no one returned her calls. In 2001, she found a private investigator on the internet who agreed to help her. Suzanne Shepard of Ames, New York was willing to come to St. Louis to look into Michele's case. Suzanne had previously worked as a police officer in Arizona. Suzanne was able to raise funds through donations to cover her travel and hotel expenses, but she had to donate her time. Upon her arrival in St. Louis, Suzanne met with family members. She also met separately with Monroe County Sheriff Dan Kelly and 2 investigators from the Illinois State Police Cold Case Squad. Unfortunately, Suzanne's involvement in the case didn't lead to any resolution. She was told that any promising persons of interest had been ruled out already. Today, Michele's case sits in limbo. Her family has never given up hope of finding her killer, but they are unable to get the case moving. Sharon Alexander is now in her mid-70s and wants the police to find her daughter's killer before she passes. And Debbie hasn't given up on her older sister's case, and she's determined to make headway and get some answers. And at the very least, have a sit down with police to find out what's been done and what still can be done. Debbie sat down to discuss her older sister Michele and the resistance she's faced in getting justice for her. That conversation is coming up in just a moment. Many of you know that true crime is my passion, but even someone like me needs a break from it every once in a while. So when I need a mental palate cleanser, my go-to refresher is Best Fiends. Best Fiends is a fun game that has a great puzzle-solving aspect to it, and an ongoing story that unfolds as you play. What I really like about Best Fiends is that the game really stimulates your brain and can be played casually. It's got a great-looking design and bright, bold colors. I'm about to break the 400 level, and I'm excited to see what's ahead. I'm really having a lot of fun in the process, and I try to play every day. Best Fiends updates the game monthly with new levels and events, so it never gets old. It's hours of fun right at your fingertips, and you can even play offline. With over 100 million downloads and tons of 5-star reviews, Best Fiends is a must-play. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. Hi, Debbie, and thanks for joining me to discuss your sister Michelle's case with us.
Thank you.
Your sister was only 19 when she was murdered in October of 1984. So young, that's so tragic. How old were you at the time?
I was just 11 years old when she was killed.
So she's was your older sister. Did you look up to her?
Yeah, I really did look up to her. Mickey, we affectionately called her, and she basically claimed me as her baby. She would take me places with her and let me hang out with her and stuff like that. So yeah, it was tragic.
So it seems like despite the age difference, she still liked hanging out with you and doing stuff with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can you share some of your memories about what kind of person she was, what she was like?
Oh yeah, she was quite colorful. She was very petite at 5'4", and she had a size 5 shoe, and she loved to wear heels, and she was a big fan of Prince, as a lot of people were back at that time. And I remember her favorite color was purple, and just remember sharing music with her. Anything she liked, of course, I liked at 11. So I just remember her being very cool. She also sang in a band, a local band.
So it seems like she was pretty cool, not just like a average person. It seemed like she had a lot going on.
Yeah, she did. She sure did.
So I take it at that age when this happened to your sister, your family probably didn't talk a lot about the details with you. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Yes, you would be. The details that I actually received would have been more from Mickey was our oldest sister, and then we have 2 siblings in between us. The information would have been more from my next oldest sister. She kind of shared some information with me and stuff I overheard my parents saying.
So you, even though they tried to shelter you from some of the details, you still heard and learned some things about what happened to your sister when you were young, when this first happened.
Yes, I did. Yes.
If you would, take us back to the night when she was killed on October 1st, 1984. Your sister wasn't feeling good, but she decided to go to work at her shift at the Jack in the Box restaurant, which would ultimately be a fateful decision. Do you remember that day yourself? Do you remember her debating whether she would go to work or not?
I do. I remember her getting up, and it was the time, I guess it was a couple hours before her shift, and she would have started getting ready to go to work. And I remember her speaking to my mom and telling my mom she wasn't feeling very good and she was going to take something. And I remember my mom saying, "Why don't you just stay home today?" And my sister was, she was adamant. She wanted to go to work. She felt like she needed to go in.
And so she went that day. It's important to point out too that she was working the night shift. So I take it that no one really knew she was missing until the following morning. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So the next morning when I guess your family woke up and she's not there, were they immediately concerned? Did they know something was wrong, or did they think that maybe she went out, or something along those lines?
Well, I know my mom was extremely concerned. My mom was a worrier before anything happened to my sister. So my mom, of course, with my sister not being home that morning and her being 19 and not 15 and running away from home, my mom knew that there was something really wrong. Something had happened.
Had your sister ever stayed out before or not come home as expected before?
No, she did not. But she had only been living back home with us for, I want to say, it could have been a month at the time she had moved back in. She had moved out for a short time with a boyfriend of hers, and it didn't work out, and that ended, and then she had moved back in to our home with us.
Okay. So it was out of character for her just to not show back up at home one day.
Yes, she always let my mom know where she was going, even at 19, where she was going, about what time to expect her home. Don't worry about me. I might not be coming home. I might stay at my friend's house, stuff like that. So when she didn't come home after working a closing shift at the restaurant, my mom pretty much knew something was just not right.
And she pretty early called the restaurant. Is that correct?
My mom, as soon as she realized my sister wasn't home, she called the Jack in the Box restaurant that my sister worked at. And I don't know if she got the general manager right away, but she did speak to one of the managers there, I know. And I remember her saying that the manager watched my sister walk across, which was a pretty busy street. At the time, it was just off a main highway in St. Louis, Missouri, so it was pretty busy. But he said he watched her. She turned around. They waved at each other. She got in her car and normally heads toward the main highway I was talking about. But this time, she actually headed in the opposite direction, like she maybe was going to have a drink with somebody or going to visit somebody before she went home.
But she didn't mention having any plans. It was just him seeing her drive out of there.
Correct. She did not mention anything.
So we know that she made it to work. She worked her shift. Everything was fine when she left. She drives off and never makes it home.
Yes.
What was the next course of action? Did your mom call the police right after that?
I think it was pretty immediate. I think my mom was really quick on calling the police. So I know it was that day she called. I don't know if it was, the morning or afternoon, but I know that very day she did call the police.
And during this time, you're 11 years old. Did you sense the panic that was going on? Did you sense that your mom was really upset that something might have happened to her?
Yes, I did. I sensed it.
When the police came out to your house, did they seem to take it serious as far as, I don't know how much you were involved being 11 years old, but maybe what was shared with you after the fact, did they seem like they took it seriously?
I felt, and I don't know whether this was prior to her body being found or after. So I don't know in that short period between, because it was only a few days, I don't remember if they actually were really serious about it or not, but I know that at the point where a body was found, they were serious enough that they called both my father, stepmother, and then my mom and my stepdad out because they wanted somebody to be able to identify whether it was her or not.
Yeah, I know a lot of the cases back then, especially when somebody didn't come home one night, they chalked it up as, they're a teenager, they're a young adult, they're just out having fun, they're partying with some friends, they're going to come home.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's the time when that time makes a difference on searching for someone and maybe finding them safe or not finding them safe.
Exactly, yes.
Do you get the sense now, maybe looking back with everything that any of that happened?
I don't know. I don't think I had that sense at all because I don't remember my mom saying anything about them not taking it seriously or anything like that. I remember that they took the report and everything. So as far as I know, we didn't get that typical runaround of, she's 19, she can go wherever she wants to go, and she's probably with a friend. I don't think we really got that.
Well, that next few days before her body was found, that had to be really tough on your family. As a parent myself, I couldn't imagine not knowing where my child is for a few days. How did your mom cope with that?
My mom was very, I don't know if you want to call it sad or depressed at the time, but she was definitely withdrawn and just basically crushed. I mean, she was in tears every day. I remember, and it was kind of one of those things where I didn't really bother my mom. I kind of went to my next oldest sister, for support or, for food or whatever it was that I needed. I didn't really go to my mom during that time.
Were there a lot of friends, people connected to your family stopping by and offering to lend any support or anything along those lines?
I don't really remember family friends stopping by. I just really remember the police stopping by. We did have a couple family members that came in and out during that time, but those were close family members, like my uncles and aunts.
And you mentioned a few days after she went missing, her body was found by hunters.
Well, actually, before that, her car was found.
Oh, that's a good point, and I'm probably going to rearrange this when I edit it to put that back in, because I did have a question about the car coming up. I probably should ask that first. So let me ask that question first. When was her car discovered, and where was it discovered?
Her car was discovered, I believe it was either the day after we noticed she was missing. I think it was the day after, so that would be October 1st, 2nd, 3rd, before her body was ever found, of course. And the reason we even had any knowledge of that is because the man who discovered the car was parked in a neighborhood about a block from her work, and it was in front of his home. And I remember overhearing people talking about this, but he apparently woke up in the middle of the night and saw two men. Now, I don't know what they look like or anything, but two men drop the car off, get in another vehicle, and leave.
And is that, you mentioned not knowing what they look like, is that because he wasn't able to provide a description of them?
Yes. And I believe it must have been because it was dark, because I think the guy actually had to go through hypnosis or said he would go through hypnosis to try and recall anything that he could, and that didn't seem to work either.
And did he himself eventually call the police and say, hey, there's a weird car parked out in front of my house?
I actually think that's how it got reported to begin with. And then I think when the police came out and ran the place, they realized she had been reported missing.
As far as you know, as detail-wise, whether it's anything you knew at the time or anything you've learned since then, was there anything unusual about the car, any clues in the car about what might have happened?
Well, they were unable to get any kind of fingerprints, nothing, no body fluids or anything in the car, but it was impounded right away. So it wasn't driven to the impound lot. Obviously, it was towed. And when they went ahead and processed the car and released it, my stepdad and my brother went to go get it and realized that the brake lines had been cut. There were no brakes.
So that's troubling sign.
Oh, yeah.
And they weren't just deteriorated or anything like that. They were actually cut.
They were cut. Yes, they were cut. And the problem was, I guess, the frustration for my parents was that the police didn't seem to notice that when they processed it.
How long after the fact did they find that out, or did they determine that?
My stepdad, immediately upon picking up her car, called them and notified them that the brake line had been cut.
Because I assume he tried to drive it home and couldn't stop, maybe?
Yes, correct. And I think that was, after the funeral and everything had happened, after they were completed with it. So it wasn't right away.
Okay. And just a day or two after the car is found, hunters found a body that turned out to be your sister.
Yes.
Your family, or certain members of your family, were asked to go identify the body?
Yes, I remember that night, and it was, I guess my parents were getting ready to leave. My mom and my stepfather were getting ready to leave the home. It was my bedtime. Couldn't recall what time, maybe 9 o'clock. And they had to go. All I knew at the time was that they found a body, and I figured they were just going to tell them, it's not her. So I went to sleep and remember waking up the next morning and my sister giving me the news.
As an 11-year-old, how do you process that information?
Well, for years, I guess I didn't at 11, because for years I kept believing that she was still alive and that really wasn't her. It was a mistake.
Yeah, I think kids have a way of protecting themselves. Maybe that that's part of that until they're able to come to terms with it. Right. And how devastated was the rest of your family?
I remember my mom falling apart. I remember my stepdad falling apart. I think my brother and sister did their crying, but I think they were pretty stoic through it, more or less probably because they knew we had to support one another, and that for a while, Mom's not going to be available.
No. And that's it's times like those. Maybe it's good to have some older siblings to help. Because when there's a parent going through that kind of grief, I can't even put myself in their shoes. How I can't. How that affects them. So you're forced to deal with this tragic news that your sister's found. She's not only dead, but she's been murdered. I mean, that must have been shocking in itself. Did your family start to say, I think so-and-so may have done this, or I know so-and-so had an issue with her? What kind of things went through your minds at that point? Well,
up until she disappeared, we were still under the impression that she, the ex-boyfriend and her broke up, that she was dating this other guy, and he seemed very nice and friendly, and he would come over to the house and hang out with us. So we obviously didn't think for a minute that it was him. We thought it was the ex-boyfriend because he was very aggressive with my sister. And I recall one night when my sister had moved back in with us that he came out to our house, and I remember him and my stepfather getting into it in the front yard, and my stepfather knocked him out. And I guess when he awoke, he left. But I just remember my stepfather doing that because he was abusing my sister.
So he's, in your minds, he was an obvious suspect, and probably to police, anytime there's like a breakup, an ex-boyfriend is going to be high on the list. Right. Was he checked out thoroughly by police?
He was checked out, and he did, in 2001, he did provide a DNA sample, and so did the guy she was dating at the time, because, of course, we didn't think he had anything to do with it, but the police were like, no, wait a minute. We need to check everybody. So at the time, those are the only two suspects I believe they went and actually took DNA from and tested it, and obviously they both were exonerated. So this
is, she's killed before DNA is ever really something that they knew about. But it sounds like they did a good job of preserving the evidence from her body in order
I believe
to.
so.
Yeah. So was there anyone else that might have had a reason to harm her, or anyone that you came to know about that had any kind of run-ins with her or anything like that?
She was a very cute girl, and she had a lot of people that would come through the drive-thru. She was a shift manager at where she worked. So she would have a lot of people come through the drive-thru and harass her. And I don't know if, maybe that led to somebody stalking her, or somebody, just not taking no for an answer, or I don't really know. I know that was one of our concerns. Also, some of the management staff at Jack in the Box, I know, were questioned and didn't seem to raise a flag. None of them did. So I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 100% sure she knew who did it.
So in your mind, you don't think it was a stranger. You think it's someone that knew her, or she knew in some way.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Why I believe this is because of an incident that happened probably 2 months before her murder. We had received a phone call at the house, and she was actually in the backyard. She was getting out of our pool, and I was getting ready to step outside on the deck, and then the phone rang. So since I was standing there, I answered the phone. The person on the other end of the line sounded like a male, but with like a really raspy voice. And they had asked if Mickey was home, and I said yes, but she's outside at the moment. They then asked me if I was Debbie, and I said yes. And they asked me how old I was, and I said 11. And at this point in time, Mickey had walked in the back door where I was standing talking on the phone, and she looked like horrified at me and said, "Who are you talking to?" So I asked the caller what their name was, and I couldn't make out what the name was, but it's hard to explain. It was almost in like a whispery, sloppy, whispery voice. They said something, and I guess at that point they had heard Mickey, and they hung up right away.
And did your sister give you an indication that she thought she knew who it was, or?
No, but she did give me a couple choice words about giving anybody any information about me over the phone.
So she was worried that you were giving information about yourself to somebody that
shouldn't have it.
Yeah, she's looking out for you as a big sister would be.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. But you think that somehow she, possibly that person that was calling, was connected to your sister somehow.
I do.
Yeah. And not just calling as a stranger that happened to find her number in a phone book, or was a stalker.
Right.
Did she ever express, before she was murdered, any kind of worry about anyone stalking her or anything like that?
Yeah, she didn't express anything like that. So I don't know. I guess it's the phone call. Just kind of set in my mind that had something to do with her death. But maybe it didn't, and it could have been a stranger or somebody that was, like I said, stalking her, and she didn't even know it. She never really spoke about having any concern about her safety.
Yeah. Do you wish that you could go back in time and sort of listen to that name and hear it?
Oh, yeah.
Have you played that instance over in your mind over and over again?
Of course, yes. 1,000,000 times.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't go back in time and do that. And maybe you mentioned that they answered it, and maybe they wanted to answer, but in a way that you couldn't really tell what they said.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah. Eventually, the case went cold. as time passed with no answers. How hard was that, months turning into years for your family not having answers and not knowing who had done this?
All I can say is to this day, it is devastating. And my mom, like you said, to imagine losing a child, we both have children. I can't even imagine it. It's got to be the worst pain anybody has ever had to deal with. It's painful. It's very painful. My mom is thankful that at least she has one person in the family who wants answers. Honestly, my mom would love answers, but her biggest fear is having to go to a trial and having to hear the details.
Yeah, that's a whole nother wound.
It really is.
That people that get that news and that information that they've been waiting for, but then they don't realize until it happens that, hey, this is another reliving of this that I've got to go through.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just digging the wound open. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that she was happy that someone wants to know what happened. Are your siblings in the same train of thought as you? They're still digging, or are they sort of maybe some people deal with it differently? They want to put stuff behind them. How are your siblings taking it?
I think, like what you just said, some people are different and want to put things behind them. My brother, if I say anything to him about, anything I heard recently about the case or when I had reopened it, he didn't seem real keen on it. And I think it was due to the level of pain it caused him initially. My other sister, she's very reserved and more on the shy side than I am, I would say. And because of that, she has not done any digging. That's not to say she doesn't support me, because anytime I have tried to talk to her about it, she has tried to be insightful and give me any information she possibly remembers. So I think she's just glad that I haven't, that I haven't stopped looking.
Yeah. You have stuck with your sister's case over the past 3.5 decades. You've tried to be involved, I guess, with what the police are doing along the way.
Yeah.
Were there any developments along the way in the case, as far as you talked a little bit about DNA and stuff? Were there any other developments in the case along the way that you maybe had hope might lead to some results?
When we found out, I had hired a private investigator from New York State in 2001. She actually worked for me pro bono and came to St. Louis and made some noise and had the case re-aired, and that's how we got the DNA tested. And at that point in time, we were on needles and pins because we thought for sure, one of these two did it. The DNA is going to prove, and we're going to have it blocked up, and this is going to be done, and he can't do it to anyone else. And, and the world is safer. But when it came back negative, I guess our hearts just kind of sunk, But that's probably the most excitement we've had on the case.
And that not matching probably led to more questions and more possibilities now, that it wasn't either of those two.
Definitely. I mean, I've even in my head, I'm really well versed in violent crime. As I said, I listen to your podcast. I listen to a ton of podcasts. I read a ton of stories, and I did go to school for criminology. So, my passion for that is really solely because of what happened to my sister. But I mean, I haven't done anything with my criminology degree. So, but I do have a lot of passion for other people's cases too.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I talk to a lot of people that become their their loved one's best advocate, their best investigator sometimes, in cases where the police aren't doing a good job or aren't doing enough, or they don't feel that they're paying enough attention to it. These family members sort of take on the responsibility themselves. Has that sort of been you a little to any extent?
Yeah, it has. And I realize that what happens is the police have a lot of violent crime to deal with, and they don't necessarily keep your case alive because they have new stuff coming in, and then your case gets set aside, and it may take a few years of a lot of noise and rattling cages before you can get them to say, oh, hey, okay, maybe we can do something with this. And that's kind of the point I'm at now, is that the last time I spoke to a detective about my sister's case was 2007. And at that time, the detective was wonderful. And he said that what he was going to do was take the DNA profile from my sister's case and have something done to it, something that they had, something that was new in DNA. And to be honest with you, it kind of, whatever it is, expands the profile. I can't remember what he called it, but he was going to have it put into CODIS. And then he retired. So my thought process on this whole thing is that it never got to CODIS. And the state of Illinois has a lot of budget issues and restraints, and they are not going to get the ball rolling on paying for more DNA testing to be done on something, I think, unless you really, really call them out and make a lot of noise.
Yeah. And the DNA, we talked about that a little bit. That seems like the best possible clue that might help solve the case. Are you encouraged when you see on the news all these cases being solved that are 20, 30, 40 years old with DNA?
I'm very encouraged. I am so happy when I see one of those cases. And I've seen recently, I think one as old as 44 years old that was solved by DNA. And all I can say is that the detectives that were smart enough to take a sample of DNA back when the violent crime occurred and preserve it so well, you know what? They had a lot of foresight. They really did. That was really, really a smart thing to do with some of these cases that happened, decades ago.
Yeah, and it's in your sister's case, for example, they did the job of collecting that evidence back then, and it's up to the guys that are there today to take the ball and run with it and do what needs to be done. Sure. Are you planning on reaching out to them again to maybe request or put some kind of pressure on them to say, hey, what have you done lately?
Yeah, actually, it was, I want to say probably 4 months ago, I had emailed the cold case detective over in Monroe County, Illinois, with the Illinois State Police, and didn't get any response, which, I expected. It was a 50-50 shot on whether I got a response or not. But the anger I felt when I, after that, had looked through open cold cases in Illinois and didn't see my sister on any of these lists, the frustration and the anger I felt just kind of got to me. And my cousin, Mark, is actually going to go with me over there to talk to the police. So I'm hoping by next week I can actually go over there physically and be there in person and ask them for some answers, because, I know these cases aren't important in solving after so many years have gone by, but this is important to us, her family. So we want the answers, and I don't think I will ever give up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you deserve at the very least to get a response from someone.
Exactly.
That should be 100% response that, hey, we're working on it. Even if they can't really talk about it,
Right.
You deserve the respect of, I'm sorry, I wish we had this solved, but we're continuing to work on it. So I think that's unexcusable to not at least give you the courtesy of a response.
Exactly. And I think maybe I should probably explain why there is DNA on my sister's case, because I really didn't go into detail about how she was murdered.
Yeah, sure.
So she was, from what the last detective I worked with said, she had probably been beaten in the head, in the face, probably was passed out, because the pictures I did not look at, but the pictures showed her, I guess her face was distorted, her nose and stuff looked like she had been punched very hard in the face. So we don't know if she was knocked out when the death occurred or not, but she was beaten and she was manually strangled and sexually assaulted. And so the sexual assault is where we were able to get the DNA sample from.
Wow. That's a terrible way to an ordeal to face at the end of her life. And I can't even imagine your family having to think of that.
It's awful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I do hope that when you go there face to face, that someone has the courtesy to, the respect to acknowledge you and give you some kind of answers. And hopefully they are working on it still and thinking of ways to move forward with the case. Do you have any websites or social media pages set up or anything for Michelle's case?
No, I do not. And I guess the reason, there's a lot of people that are aware of my sister's death and what occurred and friends of hers. But I think my concern is that because there is nothing, if you do an online search with her name, because nothing comes up, I'm afraid that's going to make it hard for me to actually, make a Facebook page about it or get anybody to talk about it or to, to say things that they remember or they know and they didn't want to talk about before, whatever it may be that would help to solve her case. I just think it's going to be a difficult challenge just because of the lack of media attention that the case has gotten. I did want to say, though, that in 2001, when I reopened the case and they were taking the DNA samples and they had aired it on the news again on a couple different stations, there was a case, and I looked for this case and I could not find who it was. I'm sure it's probably online somewhere, but there was a case that was solved because they aired my sister's case, and it was another case of an unsolved murder in Illinois of a young lady, and a woman called in the tip thinking that my sister's case was hers, and they found it was another case, but that murder case had been solved, and they were able to find out who had killed the young lady in Illinois. And again, like I said, I'm sorry, I looked for this young lady's name and everything, and I couldn't figure out which case it was.
Oh, that's very important, and that just proves that every once in a while these cases being revisited and having some publicity maybe will inspire someone to come forward with a tip. And you never know if someone that wouldn't talk 20 years ago because they were afraid or whatever, maybe they will now.
Exactly.
So you never know. So hopefully anyone out there listening to this episode about your sister that knows anything about her case or heard anything, maybe they'll do the right thing and come forward, and we'll be sure to put the contact information in there for the police so they can share that information.
That would be great. That would be fantastic.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your sister's story with us, sharing your efforts to find the truth after all these years. I know it hasn't been easy, and definitely not easy on your mom and family. Again, I hope you get the answers you've been looking for.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. If you have information about the murder of Michele Frank, please contact the Monroe County Sheriff's Department at 660-327-4060. Thanks goes out to Debbie Buck at TrueCrimeDiva.com for writing and research assistance in this episode. We'll be back here soon with an all-new episode of The Murder in My Family. As we wrap up, I hope you'll check out this preview of a true crime podcast I think you'll enjoy. It's called Resolved Mysteries, so be sure to give it a listen. And before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.
Hi, we're Eliza,
Allison,
and Carlin, and we're the hosts of Resolved Mysteries podcast. Our podcast follows the 80s and 90s television show Unsolved Mysteries, hosted by Robert Stack. We have a love for true crime and the unsolved.
If you don't remember Unsolved Mysteries, we forgive you, but you don't have to know to get into our show. If you like true crime stuff, ghost stuff, alien stuff, or just stories about weird shit like Bigfoot, this is your podcast.
The stories we cover range from totally ridiculous to truly heartbreaking. We do detailed research on all of the segments that Unsolved Mysteries aired, then drink some wine and give you the latest updates on every case. We talk about stories that will leave you laughing, crying, and occasionally outraged.
Resolved Mysteries podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your favorite pods. Join us and perhaps you may be able to help solve a mystery.